Life expectancy is a population level metric that's calculated based on death rates at all ages. So when you have high early age mortality, it brings the average way down. We still had plenty of people that lived out into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s in 1900. But life expectancy at birth was very, very low at that time because of high infant mortality. So the reason why we had a quantum leap in life expectancy in the early 20th century was because infant mortality was reduced dramatically. We brought down infectious diseases. Public health had a very powerful influence on duration of life. We brought in vaccines and antibiotics and lots of things that we could use to intervene in early age mortality, and that led to the first longevity revolution.
Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, how to live longer, healthier life. We are produced by Inside Tracker, your science-based guide to optimize your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. J. Olshansky. Dr. Olshansky is a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago, working on biodemography and gerontology, and is a co-founder and chief scientist at Lapidus Solutions. Jay is an associate editor of the Journal of Gerontology, Biological Science, and Biogerontology, and is a member of the editorial board of several other scientific journals. Jay has been working with colleagues in the biological sciences to develop the modern biodemographic pedigram of mortality, an effort to understand the biological nature of living organisms, surviving and dying out processes. The focus of his research has been on estimates of the upper limit of human longevity, exploring the health and public policy implication associated with individual and population aging, forecast of the size, survival, and age structure of the population, the pursuit of the scientific mean to slow aging in human, the longevity dividend. Welcome, Jay.
Thanks for having me.
That's great, and I'm very excited about our discussion. I think that we have a lot to learn from you and from your wealth of knowledge and information. But before we'll dive into science, I would like to start by asking you, what led you to become a scientist?
Oh, goodness. I had an interest in science from childhood. My greatest interest when I was a kid was in chemistry. And for whatever reason, it eventually morphed into other things, but it was always science. If you asked me when I was a child what I wanted to be as an adult, the answer was a scientist. And so it brought me great pleasure the first time I was able to legitimately answer that question after I received my PhD in 1984. It felt pretty good. But yeah, it goes all the way back to my childhood.
Excellent. And what sparked your interest in longevity and healthspan?
Longevity and healthspan was sparked by an event that happened in the late 1970s. I was in graduate school. I was taking a class from a professor by the name of Bernice Newgarden at the University of Chicago, and she had just written a book on whether or not we should be funding science to slow the biological process of aging. And she wanted to know what would happen if we succeeded from a demographer's perspective. I was training in demography. And I said, sure. So I went to the library, and I'm pretty sure I didn't leave for maybe 2-3 years because I dove into every single book I could find at the Regenstein Library at the University of Chicago. And there were a lot devoted to this issue of aging and longevity. She asked me to write a paper, which I did. It ended up being my master's thesis, and then eventually I shifted over into aging and longevity. And the foundational question then is the same as the foundational question that I'm addressing now, which is how long can humans live?
Yeah, and that's definitely a very interesting and I would say charged question. Talking about a book, you wrote a book, The Quest for Immortality. So what drove you to write this book?
So this was, let's see, when did we write this? We wrote this in the late 1990s, I think. I actually can't remember. It's right behind me. um, so, I mean, look, we had all this, my colleague and I, Bruce Carnes, we worked very closely together. We published an article, a lead article in Science back in 1990, answering the question of how long we think we can live. There was a lot of hype and misinformation out there at the time. Well, there still is actually, but it was particularly bad in, before 1990. And so we decided to lay it all out on the line on what we knew, what we didn't know. And that the culmination was that book that we published, The Quest for Immortality. We weren't the first ones to address this issue of how long we can live. That's been addressed by a lot of folks, a lot of scientists for decades, even centuries. So a lot of people back in the 90s, late 80s and 90s were claiming that they had all kinds of secrets to the fountain of youth. And we were familiar with the same secrets that have been proposed by others for the last 1,000 years. We summarized them in the first chapter of the book. I call anti-aging medicine the second oldest profession because people have been selling it for a long time. They're still selling it today. So yeah, in the end, it was really a need to get out what science told us about aging and longevity because there was so much non-science, I guess nonsense out there.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it sounds like that still we don't have yet the formula how to live forever for sure. And I was very excited to read the paper that you wrote a few months ago, and actually that's one of the reasons that I decided to interview you. And basically, you looked at basically. A lifespan curve and so on in different places in the world and what happened with them. And a part of it you've shown in the paper that there've been a significant decrease in human lifespan over the last or the past 100 years. And I would like to start by asking, what are the factors that allow us to live so much longer now than 100 years ago? And maybe you can even describe what was the lifespan 100 years ago and what is it today?
Yeah. So, and I'll give you a bit of the backstory, but basically, back in 1900, across the globe, life expectancy was somewhere between 40 to 50 years, life expectancy at birth. It was heavily influenced back then by high infant, child, and maternal mortality. Remember, life expectancy is a population level metric that's calculated based on death rates at all ages. So when you have high early age mortality, it brings the average way down. We still had plenty of people that lived out into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s in 1900. But life expectancy at birth was very, very low at that time because of high infant mortality. So the reason why we had a quantum leap in life expectancy in the early 20th century was because infant mortality was reduced dramatically. We brought down infectious diseases. Public health had a very powerful influence on duration of life. We brought in vaccines and antibiotics and lots of things that we could use to intervene in early age mortality. And that led to the first longevity revolution. Now, that longevity revolution brought life expectancy from 40 to 50 up to about 80 in the latter part of the last century. And in the last quarter of the last century, we started to experience declines in middle age and old age mortality. But the gains in life expectancy were much, much smaller because we weren't saving the young anymore. We were saving people who had already lived to middle age and later ages, and you can't add as many years of life to older individuals as you can to younger individuals. And that's part of the story on what we discovered back in 1990. So before I discuss the latest Nature Aging paper, let me take you back a little bit to 1990. Back then, my colleague Bruce Carnes and I discovered something that really caught our attention. And it's what ultimately led to this latest manuscript that just came out. So we noticed that if you start eliminating major diseases, these were calculations that we did back in 1990, but if you eliminate cancer, you only add about 3.5 years to life expectancy. If you cure cardiovascular disease, maybe 4.5 years. If you cure everything, back in 1990, you'd be lucky if you got a life expectancy of 90. So the obvious question to ask is, if you cure everything, how come we don't live forever? How come we're not immortal? And the answer is the underlying biological process of aging gets in the way. And that was immutable then. It's currently immutable. It hopefully won't be in the future, but currently it's immutable. So back then, we estimated that once enough people make it out to older ages, in other words, if we succeed in reducing early, middle, and old age mortality enough so that about 85% of the population, 80 to 85%, become exposed to the biological process of aging, that the life expectancy would have to level off. So we anticipated it would level off at about 85, about 88 for women, about 82 for men. You still have to have a lot of people live past 90 and 100 to get an average of 85. So that was our hypothesis that ended up being the lead article in Science in 1990. That was our In Search of Methuselah, estimating the upper limits to human longevity paper. A lot of people didn't like that conclusion. They didn't agree with us. They said, no, life expectancy is going to accelerate higher. And we basically said it can't. They don't like that word, can't. And so we waited 10 years. And in 2001, we took a look at the data from Japan, Sweden, and the United States. I think those were France, Japan, France, and the United States, to see whether or not the evidence supported our original hypothesis. It did. We saw the exact same phenomenon in 2001. We published that in Science. That was called Prospects for Human Longevity. So we knew back in 1990, and we knew in the year 2001 that what we were going to find today, which is the rise in life expectancy has to slow down. It must slow down. It doesn't matter how much you exercise. It doesn't matter if we eat right. It doesn't matter if we discover cures for heart disease, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's. It doesn't matter. As long as aging remains unaltered, the rise in life expectancy has to slow down. So we waited an additional 20 years. That's what led to this latest paper in Nature Aging. We looked at the 10 longest lived populations in the world. And indeed, exactly as we had predicted in 1990 and confirmed in 2001, we now have definitive evidence that the phenomenon of this slowdown or entropy in the rise in life expectancy is happening, as we had predicted way back in 90. Now, we think that the leveling off isn't going to be quite at 85. We think it could be a little bit higher. It could be closer to 87, maybe 90 for women, maybe 84 for men, right around there. But it's not 100, and we're not even close to coming anywhere near getting the vast majority of the population, certainly not 50%, living to 100. So it goes back to that prediction that we made in 1990 in Science. And now in the latest paper, we've provided confirmation that the prediction was right. It was pretty darn close. Now, you have to realize when we made this argument again in 2001, there was a lot of disagreement. There was a group of mathematical demographers who basically said, you're wrong, Jay. Advances in medical technology are going to accelerate. It's going to drag life expectancy with it. And we said, yeah, of course, the former is going to happen. Advances in life extending technologies will accelerate, but if they don't influence aging, it doesn't matter. the rise in life expectancy will have to slow down. It wasn't sinking in.
Yeah.
Basically, this phenomenon that we're up against this immutable force, or at least currently immutable force, and unless you alter that, we are destined for a slowdown in the rate of improvement, and that's exactly what has happened. Even in the face of dramatic increases in the development of life-extending technologies.
Yeah, and in the paper you have a variable that you call average annual increase of life expectancy. Basically, how many years on average the life expectancy increase if you are born a year or 2 or 3 later. Can you elaborate on that and provide to our listener what was it at the beginning of the 20th century and what is it right now, just to explain how it's a level off?
So so a couple of things here. First of all, I think what you're referring to is the magnitude of the reduction in the death rates required to raise life expectancy at birth by 1 year. So back in 1990, it required about a 9.5% reduction in total mortality to go up 1 year, let's say from 80 to 81.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think, oh yeah, just do the same thing over again when life expectancy is 85 and you can get to 86. No, it doesn't work that way. Once the higher life expectancy goes, the more difficult it becomes to raise it further. So once you get up to where we are today, which is what we showed in the latest manuscript, I think it's about a 12 to a 13% reduction in all causes at all ages to go up 1 year today. In other words, it's far more difficult today to raise life expectancy at birth by the same mathematical amount, arithmetically, than it was 30 years ago, which is sort of the demonstration of entropy in the life table that we had been talking about all along that really wasn't sinking in to a lot of folks. So it's a life table estimate of what's required. It's a reverse engineered answer to the question. A lot of people seem to think that we generated forecasts that we were projecting into the future. We made no projections at all in our latest manuscript, not one. We reverse engineered the answer to the question, and let me explain what that means. It's sort of like answering the question, if you had a 12-foot tall truck, how high would you have to build the bridge for that truck to go under it, right? So the answer is a little over 12 feet. It's not rocket science, right? And so it's the same thing with longevity. In order to answer the question, what do you have to do to get life expectancy up to 85 or to 100? We know the answer to that. It's a life table function. And what we calculated was that death rates would have to decline by somewhere around 85% to get a life expectancy of 100, which is more than the cure for everything that's with us today, which means it can't happen unless we somehow modulate the biological process of aging. Again, this concept of can't or must, rubs some people the wrong way. They're not getting it. It's not sinking in that this is a life table function, and the mathematics of the life table don't lie. This is exactly what's required to get these life expectancies higher. If I had to guess, some of the folks that are talking about these higher life expectancies have never actually calculated it. So they don't know how it's done. They don't realize that it mathematically can't really happen, except under conditions that would be so unusual that, that we wouldn't be humans anymore in order for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think that the listener need to understand, you're talking about the average life expectancy. It doesn't mean that someone can't live to 120, but on average, we will live to, let's say, women, you said 89 or 88 or something like that. That's what the average will live. And we know some people die from early cancer, some people die from a car accident, another, and you need to, all of that is getting into the average. So
yeah, I mean, right now in today's modern world, about 80% of the population dies between the ages of 65 and 95. Maybe about 6% make it past 95. And everyone else dies before 65. And, remember, there's a stochastic component, there's a random component, a very strong stochastic component to aging. So people can live very healthy lifestyles and still die in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. It happens all the time. Then you have people that adopt unhealthy lifestyles. They'll die earlier. You can have people with unhealthy lifestyles who live long.
Yeah.
Jean Calment, who lived to 122, smoked for 100 years. So it's not a simple equation. And getting everyone to adopt a healthy lifestyle is not going to achieve a life expectancy of 100 for the population. If everyone adopted a healthy lifestyle, which would be a good thing, we would be healthier longer, but life expectancy would not rise much beyond where we are today. Ironically enough, it would go up a few years, but keep in mind, a few years in today's world is a lot. We're not dealing with an arithmetic scale anymore on life expectancy. We're dealing with a logarithmic scale. So the same arithmetic increase in life expectancy requires a pretty dramatic reduction in death rates just to get there.
As a Longevity by Design podcast listener, you understand the value of improving your health for today and for all the years ahead. And if you want to live your healthiest, longest life possible, you need to understand what's going on inside. At Inside Tracker, we take a personalized approach to healthspan optimization that eliminates guesswork from your wellness plan. Inside Tracker analyzes blood biomarker and DNA data, along with physiomarker data from fitness trackers like Oura Ring, to deliver personalized food, supplement, lifestyle, and exercise recommendations that allow you to take control and improve your health span. And for a limited time, Longevity by Design listeners can get 20% off at the Inside Tracker store. So if you're ready to receive a personal health analysis and data-driven wellness plan to optimize your body for the long haul, then it's time to start inside. Visit insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today. That's insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today.
And going back to the question before, maybe I haven't explained it well. What I'm talking about is your term radical life extension, meaning that in the early 20th century, every year life expectancy increased by a third of a year. And again, you said it because the improvement in the sanitary condition and less of infant deaths and all of that. Now I assume it's much slower. So basically we are level up and it's almost not going
Yeah.
at all.
So this is the phenomenon that we discovered in 1990. So once, remember, the death rate at extreme old ages approaches about 50%. That's the annual mortality rate at about 105.
Yeah.
Below that, it's somewhere between 25 to 50%. So once you get people into those older ranges, unless you're dramatically reducing old age mortality, you'd have to turn a centenarian into like a 20-year-old. In terms of their mortality risk in order to achieve radical life extension. I don't think the folks that talk about radical life extension quite appreciate this or understand it on what's required to get there. Again, it's a reverse engineered answer. There is no ambiguity. There's no projection. This is what's actually required to get there. So if you actually think you can turn a centenarian into a 20-year-old, by whatever intervention you're talking about, I think probably you're a bit naive. If you've ever met a centenarian, you know that it's not going to be an easy thing to do. Look, we have components of the body that aren't going to cooperate. We have this spine, that deteriorates, that disintegrates with time. We lose muscle mass, we lose bone density. This is our Achilles heel up here in the brain. Even if you fix everything else, you replace the knees and the hips and the heart and the lung, it's like a game of replacing all these body parts. But unless you replace the brain, it's not going to happen either. Or unless you could slow the biological aging of the brain, it can't happen. It's just, I've said all along, not in these bodies. You can't really push out the envelope of survival. It's sort of like suggesting that humans can run a 1-minute mile. And if I were to ask you, can humans run a mile in 1 minute? Hopefully you would say no. The current world record is 3 minutes, 43 seconds. And if I would ask you why, you would probably say, well, mechanically, our bodies aren't really designed to run that fast.
Yeah.
That's the answer. Mechanically, our bodies were not designed to last as long as radical life extension requires. Keep in mind, if everything that occurred in the 20th century in terms of declining old age mortality happened again, it was pretty remarkable, especially what happened in the last 30 years. But if it all happened over again, and it's in our latest manuscript, life expectancy would only rise by a few years. A few years, if it all happened again. It's the classic illustration of life table entropy. Now we have the definitive evidence that we just put out in this latest paper. So there is no ambiguity here. We know exactly what we've done to ourselves. And keep in mind, this is not a negative message. It's a positive message. It means we've succeeded in enabling enough people to experience the immutable force of aging. We've succeeded in extending life long enough so that we can experience something that's really difficult to modulate. And that's where the world's at today in the world of aging science. It's like, all right, so what the disease model is running out of steam. We're running out of patches for patching these bodies together. You and I are living on manufactured time. We've been patched together multiple times by medicine. How many more patches can we create? Well, we can create lots of patches, but it's not going to manufacture much more survival time. We have to do something different.
Yeah.
And that's what aging science is all about, is doing something different.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something new that never happened that can basically break the ceiling that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a glass ceiling. It's not a brick wall. And
Yeah.
there's no reason why we can't break through it. In fact, there's probably multiple ways that we can break through this glass ceiling. And I think that that's the reason why we should be pursuing multiple pathways to modulating aging, because we're probably going to have more than one answer. And the good news is that there can't be a genetic program for aging or death. Neither of those can exist. Evolution could not have given rise to an aging program or a death program. So the door is wide open.
Yeah.
Natural selection left the door open for us to modify, just as we have done to get to where we are today. There's no reason why we can't push the envelope further. That's what science is all about, aging science.
Yeah. And one point that I want to double click on is the point that you raised, that a person that is at 105 or so have a 50% chance to celebrate his 106th birthday. And the same, someone that 106 have a 50% to celebrate his 107, so on and so forth. So it's literally a coin toss. And if you are starting to look at the statistic and you take someone that is 105 and you calculate what are the chance that you will get 120 is very, very low because of that. And that's
somebody did the math on that. I can't remember what the number is, but I don't know how many billions of people have to be alive at age 105 to get somebody out to 122.
Yeah.
It's a huge number because the death rate's 50%.
Yeah.
Even if you reduce the death rate to 40%, which would be remarkable, right? A 20% reduction in old age mortality, you still have to have an enormous number of people to just to get one person to live out to 122. So, and that's, by the way, that's just the tip of the tail of the survival distribution.
Yep.
And the tail doesn't wag the dog, and the tip of the tail doesn't wag the tail.
Yeah,
so it doesn't really mean very much that we can make somebody live to 123 if the rest of us can't make it that far. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To move the average or the median, you need a lot of people to live longer.
A different game.
Not one.
Yeah, moving the average is a different game than moving the tail of the distribution.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, the tail of the distribution is influenced by by population size.
Yeah.
So you can have the tail push out if for no other reason than you have 8 billion people instead of 4 billion people.
Yeah.
It's just the statistical probability of having somebody break a record when the number of people trying to break the record increases.
Yeah. And you discuss about the average lifespan, and I know that there is a lot of variability between different countries, and some countries live much longer than others. So can you name a few countries that are, let's say, the best as of today of lifespan?
Well, Hong Kong and Japan, although there's plenty of other countries that have these very high life expectancies, some of the Scandinavian countries as well. Singapore is very high, but Hong Kong I think, is the longest lived population. Now, technically, Hong Kong isn't a country; it's a administrative region of China. But that's one of the things that makes it interesting, by the way, because China's life expectancy is much further behind Hong Kong. Now, on the flip side, by the way, the United States, which I think are, we're probably number whatever, 45 or 50, but they're all pretty tightly, distributed at very high levels. But yeah, the U.S., we've been experiencing a more rapid slowdown in the rate of improvement in life expectancy relative to other countries. And part of what's going on here is inequality. We have large subgroups of the population that aren't doing well at all, that have very low life expectancies. It's as if people living across the street from each other are living a century apart. You've probably seen some of the studies looking at the longevity of people along the tube stops in the UK. It's the same thing here in the US. You have subgroups that have very low life expectancy, somewhere in the 70s. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some population subgroups that have a life expectancy in the 60s, equivalent to some countries in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of variability in the U.S. We're not doing that well here, and we're spending a lot of money on trying to make people live longer. Now, keep in mind, there are other subgroups of the U.S. population that are doing exceptionally well, and they have access to healthcare. They have access to better Band-Aids. If I could use that analogy, they have access to more and better Band-Aids. And when the doctors come along and give them medicine and advice, they actually listen to their doctors. So the doctors are successfully manufacturing survival time. But that manufacturing of survival time is happening everywhere in the world, in Hong Kong and Japan and Scandinavian countries. All of us across the globe, all humans past the age of 60, almost everyone's living on manufactured time.
Yeah. And you mentioned the US. So I read an article a few years ago about your city, Chicago, and you look at the food desert in Chicago versus the suburb, that maybe it's 10-mile difference, maybe less. And the difference is between 10 to 15 years, just in the same city. That's crazy.
Well, actually, it's more interesting than that. So the University of Chicago runs along a street called the Midway Plaisance. The Midway Plaisance, if you're moving away from the lake, you're driving on that street. To the right is the University of Chicago. There's a few buildings to the left. But if you go just a couple blocks to the left, which would be south of the Midway Plaisance, the life expectancy is about 10 to 15 years lower than it is at the university. That's because of the social determinants of health. People at the University of Chicago are more highly educated, have access to food, to medical care. The folks further south don't. So you're right. Food desert is the right phrase to use. They don't go to the doctor. If they do go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes medication, they don't take it. Yeah. They may not be able to afford it. They're obese because they don't make a lot of money and they can afford inexpensive food that's high in fat and high in sugar. Welcome to the United States. Yeah. I mean, that's how things work in certain parts of the world here. And, we're talking about people that live, they can almost throw a stone at each other across the street. And they're literally 10 to 15 years apart in terms of life expectancy.
Yeah, I think that on top of that, they are working very hard. They don't have time to go and spend time in the sauna and speak with their spouse all the time. They are working, and basically they are in survival mode all the time. While most of us right now, let's say the more educated, more wealthy, we have time to take care of our body. We have time to go to the gym. So that's actually, I think, a good point for our listener. What Jay said, eat well and exercise well, and it won't increase the average. That's correct, but it can significantly improve, as we see in Chicago, can significantly improve your specific lifespan.
Yeah, individually, we have a lot of power over our health and duration of life. Believe it or not, the greatest power we have is to shorten it. And we're really good at it here in the United States, right? So we become obese. And actually, I have to tell you a related story. Somebody told me just the other day, they said, "Oh, goodness, I've seen good news. the level of obesity in the United States it's leveling off. May even be getting a little bit better. And I started laughing. I said, well, I don't know if I would necessarily consider this good news. I mean, I don't like the idea of becoming more obese, but here in the United States, there isn't anyone left.
Yeah.
It has to level off at some point. There isn't anyone left, and that isn't obese.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think you get the point.
Yeah.
Is that eventually it had to level off, and if you consider that good news, I suppose that's one way to look at it. It really needs to go down.
Yeah.
And it's possible that we may see that with these GLP-1 agonists that have now entered the marketplace. I don't know what the consequences of that's going to be long term. I don't think anyone really knows yet. I'm always leery when I hear about some new technology or especially a drug that's going to come along and change things. It just reminds me of the days when we were concerned about eating butter because of the cholesterol associated with it. And there was a fear that it would cause cardiovascular disease. So everyone was telling my parents, for example, stop eating butter and start eating margarine that's made with trans fats. Well, that was a bad idea because the trans fats contributed to the cardiovascular disease, but they didn't know it.
Yeah.
It took a while for those trans fats to present themselves in a negative light. So we don't know if there's going to be a long-term or even a short-term negative consequence of using these GLP-1 agonists. Maybe we'll get lucky and maybe they'll have long-term benefits. I hope.
Yeah. So yeah, I had a deep dive on a GLP-1 a couple of episodes ago with the scientists that actually discovered it. And there are some side effects as of today. I'm sure that there will be more, but they are not so bad. And I think that the take-home message, in my opinion, is everyone that is obese, is better for him to take GLP-1 than being obese. But don't take GLP-1 just to look good at the beach or to be ready for your wedding. Work hard and maintain. But if you are obese, yeah, it's definitely a good.
Well, everyone's looking for exercise in a pill. They'd rather take a pill or a shot than actually work out and eat right.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of how we deal with acid reflux. I've had this conversation with my son, who's 37, and he's got acid reflux, and so he takes an antacid. And I go, well, have you ever thought of modifying your diet so you don't eat foods that cause the acid reflux to begin with, instead of eating the same foods and taking an antacid? I think that's part of what's happened in our world, is that we're willing to accept these harmful events as long as we have some pill or intervention or shot that we can take that can overcome the consequences of this negative event. So
yeah, and it's similar in a way to GLP-1 in a way. If you will take out McDonald's and the Burger King and the Coke and so on, then maybe you don't need GLP-1.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, look. The rule of thumb is the more drugs you take, the older you get, the higher your risk of death.
Yeah.
There's a direct association between the number of drugs and mortality risk. I'm acutely aware of this. I try to keep as much out as possible. I try to take as few drugs as possible. Actually, interestingly enough, it was just last year, my doctor wanted me to take a statin. And I said, all right, let's work on this. What do I have to do exactly to not take the statin? He said, you have to lose 20 pounds. So I lost 20 pounds.
Well,
I didn't do it using GLP-1 agonists. I ate less and exercised more. And I actually lost 20 pounds. My cholesterol dropped like a rock. He said, okay, you don't need to take this anymore. Yeah. That's what I wanted. I did not want to take any drugs.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes sense. I think that it's not easy for everyone. You need to be type A, and apparently we can see it in the population. You see it better than me, but my assumption is like 95% of the population will diet and then will go back to their original weight. So it's very hard for them, unfortunately.
It's hard. Absolutely. Yeah. It's very difficult. It was not easy. It took me months. I was losing an ounce a day. That was my goal, was 1 ounce a day.
Wow.
It took months to lose it. But, if you keep in your mind, these small steps that you take on a daily basis to lose 1 ounce, it's not so bad on a day-to-day basis. But if you just can't put your head 3 months ahead and say, yeah, I'm going to lose this amount. It's like, no. I'm just thinking about today.
Yeah.
Today, I want to lose 1 ounce. I'll worry about tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that worked.
Yeah. So you had a North Star of 20 pounds, and between that you have a lot of mileposts of what happened from today to tomorrow and tomorrow to the day after, and then
Yeah, it was just one day at a time. That was my general philosophy. And if I always thought about losing 20 pounds instead of 1 ounce, I don't think I would have done it.
yeah,
But 1 ounce, I can do 1 ounce a day.
yeah,
Interestingly enough, the philosophy is virtually the same as writing a book. That book that's right behind me, The Quest for Immortality, when I went to go write that, I set the goal of writing 1 page a day. That was it, 1 page. 1 page I can do. After a year, you've got a book written.
Yeah.
It was actually done in about 9 months because some days I wrote more than 1 page, but that was how I did it. It's the same philosophy.
Yeah. No, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. A question that I want to ask that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are asking themselves: why women live longer than men?
Yeah, I do get this question a lot. So I don't know the answer to this definitively. Those 3 words, by the way, I don't know, are the first 3 words that I teach my students to say, because it's the right answer to most questions you're going to hear. So I don't know definitively. What I can tell you is that in the animal world, most females live longer than males. Now, if I had to guess, it's probably associated with reproduction. Females are the ones in most species that are pushing out offspring. But the actual mechanics of what's going on in the body that protects women longer than men, I don't know. But it goes all the way in the intrauterine environment. In the intrauterine environment, there are, I think, the sex ratio at conception, the sex ratio at birth, I think, is about 1.05, meaning there's 105 males born for every 100 females. I'm guessing at conception, it's probably way higher than that. I don't know what it is, but let's just assume it's 110, 1.1, which would mean there'd be 110 male conceptions to 100 female conceptions, and they cross over, interestingly enough, right at about puberty. You get the same number of males and females right at around puberty, which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, that you'd have the same number of males and females by the time they begin theoretically producing offspring. But what the actual mechanics are for why the female body lasts longer than the male body, I don't know.
Yeah. So the what you raise is very interesting. What you're saying, the starting material is more male than female, and the evolution know that male will disappear, and I assume very early, and I assume that it's because we are more aggressive, we are going for wars, we are taking more risk, or something.
Well, not between the ages of 0 and 10, we're not. And so there's something fundamentally biological that's influencing this higher mortality risk among males and females, even before we go to war and start driving cars.
Yeah.
And so there's something else going on that's purely biological. Look, it's happening in the intrauterine environment as well. So there's something, there may be more congenital anomalies in males versus females that's influencing the, higher mortality in the intrauterine environment. So I don't really know the mechanics. I don't know that anyone knows the exact mechanics of why it is that this sex ratio conception and birth is over 1, but it's everywhere across the globe.
But in a way, it's continue in the older age. If I read about centenarian, and the majority of them are women, so it's like
yeah. So remember, the crossover is right at around puberty.
Yeah.
After around puberty, there's more females than males, and once you get out to very old age, the ratio is much, much higher. I don't remember what it is, but when my mother died, she died in her early 90s. My dad was like 94. They were living in an assisted care facility. He was getting hit on by all these women that were in their, 70s and 80s. He came to me one time. He goes, "They all want to have sex with me." Right? This is my 95-year-old father telling me this story, and I'm going, "So what's wrong with that?"
Have fun.
But yeah, there's I can't remember where I read this joke, but it had something to do with, if you want to increase your chances dramatically of, having a girlfriend, just live to 90. And
Yeah.
the ratio of females to males is much, much higher when you get out that far.
Yeah, yeah. I heard the anecdote that in the villages in Florida, that's the best market for STD kits because that's what they're doing. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of sexually transmitted diseases going on. And what are they worried about? It's not, it's not like they're worried about dying from these sexually transmitted diseases at these
yeah,
extreme old age. So they're having fun. And there's nothing wrong with having fun. And they're not using, condoms.
yeah. They don't
They're
have
not
the
worried about
risk of
getting
having a
pregnant.
baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another interesting fact that I realized when I researched about you is you wrote an article about stressful jobs and specifically about what is the effect of becoming a U.S. president or on your lifespan and health span. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so that article, what precipitated that article was President Obama was celebrating his 50th birthday. He was here in Chicago. He's from Chicago. And I was watching TV and I was watching an interview with him, and they cut off to a doctor who's a friend of mine. And the doctor was saying, "Oh, we all know that presidents age more rapidly." Uh, and uh, and I study aging for a living. And I never heard that before.
Yeah.
Um, And so I said, all right, this is a testable hypothesis. There haven't been that many presidents. We know exactly when they were born. We know exactly when they died. So let's figure it out. So I went back and actually calculated the observed longevity of all of the presidents relative to the longevity of the men in the time period in which they were born. And now keep in mind, to become president, you have to be, I think it's 35 years old. So you already have a selection phenomenon going on. So they've already been selected to make it past 35. But basically what I discovered was that it's not true that presidents age more rapidly. To the contrary, they appear to age more slowly. They live significantly longer than average. They live significantly longer than men born in the same era. The first 10 presidents, I think, I don't remember the exact number, but the average longevity was somewhere in the 70s during a time period when life expectancy was under 40 in the United States. We just had Jimmy Carter, who passed away a few days ago, who made it to 100. Yeah, it's sort of a classic illustration of the benefits of the social determinants of health, of education, income, access to health care. Remember, these presidents have access to the best health care in the world. They're monitored very closely on a day-to-day basis by their doctor. It's not something that happens once a year. They're monitored very, very carefully. It's sort of an illustration of why it is that the people on the right side of the Midway Pleistocene live longer than the people on the left side.
Yeah.
The presidents are like on the right side, multiplied by 10 in terms of the benefits that they get. So, yeah, I basically demonstrated that, it's possible that they may get gray hair more rapidly because of the stress associated with being president. But one of the markers of being a president is the ability to handle stress. They probably thrive on it. So it doesn't affect them the same way it affects the rest of the population. And keep in mind, we don't die from gray hair and wrinkled skin, fortunately. Otherwise, I would have been dead long ago. And so, yeah, it's possible that they may experience, hair loss and graying more rapidly, but so what? It doesn't influence how long you live.
Yeah, that's interesting and makes sense based on the care that they are receiving. So based on your current knowledge about longevity, how long can our listeners strive to live?
Well, as long as they're healthy. I'm always asked to provide a number, and I'm a little reluctant to provide a number because the number doesn't matter. For folks today that are at older ages, I think the answer that I can give is the same one that my father gave me when he was 95 years old, and I asked him, "What do you want at 95?" Because every time I would talk to him, I would say, "Are you in any pain? Is there anything I can get for you? Is there anything that you need?" His response was pretty much always the same. He was not in pain. He was, by the way, healthy up until 8 days before he died. He said, "I just want to be able to do the same things that I've always done my whole life. The number, how long I actually live, doesn't matter. What I'm most interested in is being healthy for as long as I can, pain-free." And so that would be the answer that I would give. It's okay to set goals of living to 100 or higher. It's not going to happen for most people, but what do you have to do to increase your chances? The first thing is choose long-lived parents. That would be my first option for living a very long life. That's the genetic component. But short of that, of course, you have to avoid the things that shorten life, the harmful behavioral risk factors like smoking, drinking excessively, even drinking at all. There may be evidence to indicate that alcohol itself is probably not a good idea at any level. And so once you've avoided the risk factors that increase your risk, then adopt lifestyles that lower your risk. And exercise would be top of the list. Exercise is such an amazing elixir, if I can call it that. It's about the only thing we have today that works. And it won't necessarily achieve radical life extension, but it can influence your health and quality of life at any age, even if you're 100.
Yeah.
Exercising has an immediate effect. You don't need a drug or drugs to do it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to go to these clinics and get injections of one thing or another with exaggerated, embellished claims that it's going to make you live to 100. You can get a good pair of walking shoes, or swim, or garden. But movement itself is critical. Any kind of movement, not being horizontal. Once you become horizontal, for whatever reason, our bodies deteriorate pretty quickly, especially at old age. That's sort of the biggest concern. I remember when my father went horizontal 8 days before he died, I knew he wasn't going to last long because his muscles were going to deteriorate. His bone density was going to deteriorate very rapidly. We see the same thing in astronauts, by the way. They go into a zero-G environment, and unless they exercise pretty vigorously, their bodies will go through the same process as would be the case if you were living on Earth horizontal. It's hard to get back up and regain your strength. So I think the short answer to your question is as long as you're healthy. If you want to put a number on it, fine. If that number happens to be 100, the probability of getting there is pretty low. Unless you've got parents and grandparents that made it that far. Or I would check to see if you carry the FOXO3 gene, which is associated with exceptional longevity. I happen to carry that, by the way. So I come from a long-lived group of individuals. It does increase the probability by about 50% of making it past 90. But yeah, for the most part, I wouldn't put a number on it. I would just zero in on healthy life as the primary endpoint.
Yeah, that's good. And that's actually the difference between lifespan and health span. What is the mean to live to 100 if you'll be, as you said, on the lying on the bed for 10 years? It's like you haven't been there. So don't.
It's almost like not living.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you've made it to that point, you're surviving. You're being propped up by medicine. The longevity patches that you're getting at that point are very strong. And all they're doing is keeping you, well, let me rephrase that. All they're doing is avoiding death. They're barely keeping you alive, and there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, no, that's, thank you so much for a very interesting and practical answer. So if we are following on that, In your opinion, what are the key milestones in longevity discoveries that happened in the last a few tens of years? What are the highlights of that?
Well, I'm a little hesitant to pick out specific um, interventions that people are pursuing because there's so many. I'm particularly interested in the study of the genetics of long-lived individuals. The work of Nir Barzilai and Tom Pearls. The difference between what they're doing and what others are doing is they're working with humans, right? And it's not like we can't figure out that decelerated aging or slower aging is plausible. Of course, it's plausible. We can see it all around us. There are plenty of people that are making it out past a century today where there's plenty of evidence to indicate that their biological clocks are ticking at a slower rate relative to the rest of us. And so figuring out what it is about them, perhaps genetically, that we can confer to the rest of us, I think is particularly fascinating work that's going on. But there's lots of potential therapeutic interventions. Parabiosis is interesting. Senolytic compounds are interesting. Metformin. I'm just touching on a few. There's dozens and dozens that researchers are pursuing, and I don't know which one's going to work, and maybe more than one. I'm hoping it's more than one, because if there's only one, it's not likely to work the same way on everyone. And so let's come up with alternative ways of modulating this aging process. I'm all in favor of testing them all. Let's see what works.
And that will allow us to maybe break the glass ceiling, as you call it, and maybe then we can live longer. So that's taking me to the discussion about your bet with Steve Asta that you had a while ago. Can you discuss that? And I think that's very interesting
So,
piece of information.
as I'm sure you're aware, Steve is a close friend. Way back in 1999, I believe, there was a story that came out in Life magazine. I think it was Life magazine. Might have been Time, claiming that life expectancy was going to go to 150. And I'm pretty sure Steve, the attribution was to Steve Ostad. So I called him up on the phone. I said, Steve, life expectancy can't go to 150. I said, I've already proven that. I said, I assume you don't mean life expectancy. You might mean one person, right? Maximum lifespan. He goes, yeah, not life expectancy. I said, yeah, but you have to realize going from 122 to 150 is sort of like going from building a jet plane to building a teleportation device that would get you from Earth to Mars instantaneously rather than to 9 months. I said, there's a huge difference between 122 and 150. I said, you really believe that that's possible? He goes, yeah, I think that developments in aging science are going to happen, and it will enable people to live significantly longer than we do now. I said, well, why don't we place a bet on it? And I said, the obvious amount to bet would be $150. So we each put $150 into an account, which fortunately he let me invest. I'll even tell you what I invested it in. I began investing it in gold, which at the time was, I don't know, it was like $600 an ounce. I ended up selling it for $2,000 an ounce. So we made a lot of money on that. Then I invested it in Tesla when it was at about $200 a share, and it went up to over 1,000. The bottom line is that I probably should be a financial advisor rather than.
It sounds like I need to follow your investment. So how much money do you have now from the $300 in the account?
I'm not willing to say how much is in the account right now. What I will tell you is that by the year 2150, because of compound interest and wise early investing, it will be well over $1 billion.
Wow.
$1 billion. That's why it's called the $1 billion bet.
Wow.
And so and the bet, by the way, is pretty simple. Will anyone alive in the year 2000 be alive in the year 2150? If the answer is yes, and they have to be awake, right, not a vegetable, then Steve's relatives will win the $1 billion. And if no one makes it that far, then my relatives will win that amount. I've had this discussion with my daughter, who's 40 years old. She said, "Well, what happens, Dad, if I live to 150?" I said, "You lose the bet.
Yeah.
You lose all the money." I said, "You might want to drop off at 149 and let your kids and great grandkids and all of them benefit from the $1 billion. But if you make it to 150, we lost."
Yeah.
And look, back then the world record was 122. That was 25 years ago, a quarter century ago. Guess what the world record is today?
122.
Thank you. Steve has almost no chance of winning this bet.
Yeah.
Even if some intervention comes along, let's just say somewhere in the next decade, the youngest anyone would be to get it would be 35 years old.
Yeah.
And you have to give it to the right person. The statistical probability of finding that needle in the haystack, when that haystack keeps growing pretty dramatically and the available population keeps shrinking, is exceedingly small. It's, I'll thank Steve now for contributing to the reproductive success of my offspring by making sure that my ancestors get $1 billion, which by then, by the way, you'll probably be able to buy a cup of coffee with it.
I feel that a bit more, but I think that it's in a way, first, I agree with you that there is a very good chance for your offspring to win it. But also what you told us, and now we're going to finance, about how you use the $300 and now it's much more. It's a great example of how investment early can make you a lot of money later in retirement. And it's the same for health in a way. If you think about it, if you will eat well and exercise well, not at the age of 65, start it at the age of 0 or 18, then you have a much better chance to live longer better.
Yeah. So I think the issue that you're raising is brilliant. It is absolutely the right way to think of this. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, I have 3 grandsons. Here, I'll even show you their picture because I have it right in front of me. Those are my 3 grandsons.
Nice.
Just taken a couple of months ago. And so when each one was born, I created a retirement fund, not a college fund, a retirement fund for each one of them on the day that they were born. And, every year we throw money in that account, as do other people. And the extra doublings, they're going to get 3-4 extra doublings because we're starting early instead of starting late. You put $5,000 into an account when a child is born, they're going to be multimillionaires by the time they turn 65 if you do nothing else.
Yeah.
Then start early. Now, the other point you made, I think, is equally important, right? So now we're talking about a financial investment, but investing in your health early will have a payoff later. So the decisions that you make now, whether you're young, a teenager, to not smoke, to not adopt an unhealthy lifestyle, to not take drugs, these will pay off. When you're middle-aged, maintaining an exercise regimen will pay off when you get older. So I completely agree that investing in yourself in terms of both money and health, it will pay off later in life. It's not something you want to begin later in life. It's something you want to begin early in life in both cases.
Yeah, and I interviewed a few months ago another professor from University of Illinois, but from Urbana-Champaign, and she is more dealing on addiction and how sensory of taste and smell and all of that. And she said that we adopt a lot of our behavior in the first 2 years. So basically, if you feed your a baby junk food, he will eat junk food for life. But if you feed him broccoli and, I don't know, avocado, that's what they eat for life. So that's a great example. How can you help your offspring to live better, longer from the beginning? Just feed them the right food.
Well, I would add to that the concept of epigenetic inheritance. Remember that how healthy the parents are when they conceive of the child influences the
Yep.
health of that child once they're born and later in life. So there's an epigenetic component involved as well. So it goes back to even before childhood. It goes back to the in utero environment, and it goes to the environment that the parents experienced when they conceived of the child. So yeah, health is something that you need to actually think about in previous generations.
Yeah, excellent. Jay, that was a great interview. I would like to finish by a question. I know that you answered it, but I want to ask it again because I think that we need to double click on it. What is your top tip for health span and longevity for the listener?
Today,
Yeah, today.
diet and exercise. Exercise and diet. I'll put it in that order. For whatever reason, and certainly this is the case for me, when I exercise, for whatever reason, I automatically adopt a healthier diet. It's sort of, I feel guilty, you know, exercising and then eating something that may be less healthy, like fried foods. I'm more inclined to eat healthy when I exercise. So I would begin with controlling the things that you can control. Obviously, avoiding the things that shorten life. You have to start there. There's no amount of exercise and diet that's going to overcome smoking and obesity. You can't really, it's very difficult to be obese and smoke and exercise at the same time. It's very difficult. So you're better off exercising, and it will lower the probability of these negative events. Then there are, of course, the social environments, the social determinants of health, relationships that you have with other people, not being isolated. I'm pretty sure the statistics indicate that you're better off having diabetes than being socially isolated in terms of your mortality risk. So social isolation does play a negative influence on health and longevity. So yeah, exercise, diet, social relationships, the things you can control today. And I would add in, by the way, monitor. Go to your doctor. And if the doctor prescribes medications, do your best to avoid them, through behavior modification. But if you can't, take them because they work. Look, my father took blood pressure medication for the last 50 years of his life. It's one of the reasons why he made it to 96.
Yeah.
Because they work. These statins actually work. These diabetes drugs work. It's pretty remarkable how well they lower the risk of a broad range of diseases and disorders. My wife and I have a group of doctors that we see. One monitors, these are hearing aids, by the way, and I wear hearing aids because I'm lowering my risk of dementia by wearing hearing aids on a daily basis. I see a skin doctor. I see a urologist. I go to an internist. I go to an eye doctor. I basically have as many body parts checked as I possibly can to detect any problems, which inevitably happen in all of us, by the way. These bodies weren't designed for long-term use, so things go wrong. But the earlier you catch them, the better off you are. And so monitor, listen to your doctor, do whatever she or he recommends because they know what they're talking about and their interventions work. My urologist loves it when I go in there and, we discuss options for dealing with a particular health issue. And I go, hey, you tell me what to do. You're the expert. I might be a general expert on longevity, but you're the expert on prostates. You tell me what to do and I'll do it. Yeah. It's really that simple. So it's not like we don't know what to do. We do know what to do.
Yeah. And a lot of time we're taking more care of our cars than our body, and it should be the opposite. So take care of your body. I completely agree with you as much as you can. So thank you so much for that. I think that we are coming up on our time. Thank you, Dr. Olshansky. We look forward to explore the research in the field of longevity each month with you and the leading scientists. For more information, please go to www.insidetracker.com/podcast. Again, thank you so much. That was a great interview. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gil. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by Inside Tracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit insidetracker.com/podcast.